Awesome. We'll go ahead and get started. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here in Zoomland with my friend Kym Ali, owner of Kym Ali Consulting and host of the new DE&I podcast for the Oil and Gas Global Network, also known as OGGN. Kym, thanks for coming back on the show. This is round two for the listeners. Unless you've been listening from like the eighth episode, Kym came on last year in August. And I decided to have her back on the show. So, Kym, how in the world are you, and what have you been up to lately?
I'm well. Things are going really, really great. And thank you for having me back for a
Yeah,
second episode.
absolutely. No, I'm excited to have you back. And again, a lot of times, and you'll get into this, is when you sort of develop a relationship with someone for like 45 minutes over a podcast, you're like, oh, we're buddies. We're going to talk a lot and we're going to keep in touch. But the reality is, it's like you just don't have, like, mathematically, it's hard to keep in touch with all your guests. But you keep up with them online, right? Social media, LinkedIn especially. And then when I saw you join OGGN and on one of their podcasts, I was like, well, I got to have Kym back so she can share us on all the cool, exciting stuff, which we'll get into. But I have to ask you, did you do Murph this weekend? Because I know you're a
No.
CrossFitter or a former CrossFitter now.
No, I did not do mirth, and I'm
What?
pretty sad about it because I did it for 3 consecutive years in a row. But
Yeah,
due to some injuries, I think I shared this with you before,
I
but I'm
think you
now
did.
doing
Yeah.
Orange Theory.
Oh, nice.
But no, maybe next year I will. Did you do it?
I did a modified version of it. I did it in my garage, to be honest with you. So yeah, I did a version of it. Actually, no, yeah. I mean, I did the full thing. I did the like the 5, 10, 15. I didn't do it
Oh, is
all
it
like,
Cindy? Cindy 20 times? I
yeah,
think that's what it is. Yeah.
yeah. And so I mean, I didn't do it as prescribed, but I completed all the reps, if that makes sense. So but for the listeners out there, I'm sure you're laughing like, oh, CrossFit, blah, blah. But it's for a good intent, and it's a workout, it's a benchmark workout in CrossFit, and it's dedicated to a gentleman who I think I don't know the details, and which is sad to say, but do you know the details by any chance on like who this
Um,
gentleman was? And
a little bit. I believe his Murph was his favorite CrossFit WOD. And
okay.
he transitioned over in Afghanistan. He was serving in the war. And
Mm,
unfortunately, he transitioned there. So, in honor of his memory, we do
right.
Murph every Memorial Day weekend. I believe that's the story. Correct me if
That's
I'm wrong, listeners.
I know that rings a bell, and you obviously described it a lot better than I did, but anyway, so yeah, I try and do it every year. Actually, I was in Oklahoma City yesterday. No, what day is it? Thursday, Tuesday, and one of my clients who used to do CrossFit stopped. He does more marathon running and stuff like that, but he felt like he still had it in him, so he went and did Murph, and I saw him, and he literally was walking around like T-Rex. Like he got rhabdo in his biceps, he said, so he couldn't straighten his arms, and so he was walking around like basically like this the
Oh,
whole
no.
time. Yeah, and like no joke, he could not extend his arms because of all of the reps with
The
the
pull-ups
pull-ups.
and push-ups. Yeah.
And yeah, so it's yeah, it can get you. But he was in Florida partying for like 3 days before that. So I was like, you were probably a little dehydrated going into it, which doesn't
Yes.
help at all.
Yes.
Because it's like a 45-minute to an hour workout,
Yeah.
just nonstop. So anyway, enough about that. So tell me about Orange Theory. Like, are you loving it or what?
Well, so here's the thing. I actually prefer CrossFit, but COVID-19, I gained 15 pounds during the pandemic. And
Okay, I was like 15. What?
that's what I call it, COVID-19.
Yeah, a lot
Um,
more for a lot of people though. It's all good.
right, exactly. And so, CrossFit WODs tend to be short most of the time, and there's more of a weightlifting component. So I
Yeah.
wanted to burn more fat. And so Orange Theory focuses more on cardio. And so I've been going, I believe, for about 6 months now and lost 15 pounds. I hit my
Congrats.
goal weight. Yeah, thank you.
Wow. No, that's huge. And so are you eating any different, or were you just need to be more active?
I've changed my diet because 80% of body transformation is diet. So I've changed my diet a little bit. I still have major cheat days, but I think it's just incorporating more cardio and lifting lighter weights, but
Yeah.
with more repetition is what is helping burn the fat.
That's cool. Nice. Congrats. That's huge. I mean, it's especially as we get older and the more we work, unless we're outside doing manual labor, we're more doing what we're doing, sitting here essentially not really moving. And so yeah,
Right.
it's so important to be able to do stuff like that. Are you like 6, 7 days a week, or I mean, you just kind of like what does that look like?
No, just 3 days a week.
Nice. See, folks, that's
Just
all it takes. 3 days a week, a little good of bit eating, and you're good. 15 pounds, easy.
yeah.
Kim's here to tell you. So, but no, that's good. And now we're moving into summer. Any big summer plans?
Oh, yes. I would love to travel maybe to Europe somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. That'd be
Yeah.
where in Europe?
Oh gosh, Portugal. Yeah, that's one of the countries I have
Okay.
not been to, and it's on my bucket list.
Really? So we're like, it's basically summer, and you're just now thinking about maybe scheduling a trip to Portugal. Like, are you a last minute travel planner or what?
I am, and as you know, being an entrepreneur, sometimes our personal lives take a back seat because we're so focused on the business. But I've
Yeah.
made a commitment that I have to travel for pleasure this year. Up until now, it's just business trips.
Yeah. No, I get you. That's cool. I've never been to Portugal. We went a few years back to London, Paris, and Rome. And it was so
Oh,
cool. And I mean, that was like 2018, I think 2017, maybe. And of course, when we were there, we thought we're gonna do this every year. Like this is so awesome. We love it. We were able to disconnect from crazy life back here and connect, as a husband and wife and just enjoy the world. We haven't been back since. So but anyway, I hope you get to make it to Portugal,
thank you.
and you need to take time for yourself because I'm sure you're grinding sun up to sundown pretty much every day.
Yes. Yes.
Nice. And part of your grind is podcasting now.
Yes.
This will be released kind of probably end of June, beginning in July, which at that time you will have released at least a couple episodes, I think. Tell us
Yes.
about the new podcast, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'm super excited. We're recording this the first week of June. So the podcast dropped yesterday, May 31st.
Nice.
And yeah, so it's DEI and energy. For those listening, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's the first DEI podcast in the whole energy industry. And what I love
Wow.
about it is that even though it falls under OGGN, which is the Oil and Gas Global Network, we don't want to discriminate. So we will be interviewing leaders from all energy sectors. So oil and gas, renewable energy, electric vehicles, utilities, right?
Beautiful.
So
Yeah.
yeah, leaders will come on and they'll share their successes, challenges, and lessons learned about DE&I within their organization.
Nice. No, that's huge. And to be honest, like it's kind of not gonna say odd, but I'm surprised that there hasn't been one sooner than that. And
Up
not to
until
say
now,
like,
yeah.
oh, like why did you wait so long? Like again, everyone's busy and it's just not necessarily like a focal point all the time. But it's cool that there's still opportunity to come into that space and talk about these things because they're so important. Myself being in oil and gas over the years, I've noticed it's just become, from my observation and experience, a lot more inclusive. I mean, the company I work for, um, it's again, like we hire from so many different walks of life, and it's so cool to see because it generates such good culture, conversation, discussion, chat, like challenging each other because they like folks,
Yes.
depending on whether it's where they worked or where they're from or their background or wherever
Yeah.
the case may be, it just brings such a healthy perspective if you have so many different angles coming together that
Yes.
aligns with the North Star of like being a successful business. So I think it's super cool. What made you, because obviously you were busy before that. And I encourage for the listeners to if you want to hear Kym's story, she's got an amazing story. Go back, listen to that episode. And because I think it really sets the framework for what you're doing now, because you never had like an oil and gas background, and you live in the Northeast, right? Like in Washington or something, Baltimore, maybe.
Close, yeah, it's right outside of Washington, D.C. But if
Right.
you remember from the first episode, I lived in the Middle East for 5 years.
Right.
And, they are the largest producer of petroleum. And so that was my exposure to the oil and gas industry because I had friends that worked in the industry.
That's right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were there as a nurse, correct?
A nurse consultant. Yeah, I went over
Okay.
there to open the country's first women and children's hospital, but from a health equity lens.
Yes. No, again, it's a fascinating story, and I should have done my part and listened to it before coming back on the show with you, but I didn't. Listeners, go back, listen to it. It's a beautiful story. And again, it like really sets up to where you are now. And so, fast forwarding to, or I mean, coming back to my original question is like, you were already you already had a successful consulting company. You were already making huge strides in the DE&I space. Why then add more to your plate to then start a podcast? Like it just seems, I mean, it seems obvious, but it's like just a ton more work.
That's the first question everyone asks is how did you go from healthcare to energy? Well, like I just said, my exposure to the oil and gas space was living when I lived overseas. Um, my mission was to open up a hospital preserving the Arabic culture and Islamic religion. So we were doing amazing work in this healthcare facility. But while I was there, one of my girlfriends worked in oil and gas, and she actually worked on the rigs. And the stories that she would share with me were interesting to say the least. And so back then I said, wow, if I ever have the opportunity to, work in energy, there's definitely opportunity for improvement. So fast forward, what is it, 6 years later, I'm on LinkedIn. And everyone listening, if you're not on LinkedIn, hop on LinkedIn. There are tons of opportunities waiting for you. But I
Mm-hmm.
was on LinkedIn and I connected with a gentleman named Mark LaCour. He is the owner and founder of the Oil and Gas Global Network. And we connected and we started talking, and he saw that I was in the DE&I space. And that's when he told me, hey, look, listen, I've been getting a lot of requests from listeners over the last 2 years to start a DE&I podcast. Would you be interested? So, of
Mm,
course, I said yes.
right.
And so this was probably about 1 year ago when this happened, around the same time you and I connected.
Right. Okay.
And I started doing my research because even though I was exposed, I had some, familiarity with the industry, I didn't know a lot about it. So from that year up until now, I've been researching. I've been hosting executive roundtables with industry leaders.
Nice.
One, just to learn their unique challenges and what their goals are within the industry, and two, to increase my visibility within the industry. I wanted people to be familiar with me when the podcast launched. So that way it's not, well, who is this person? She just popped out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it worked because, like I said, the podcast launched this week. And I already have I'm looking at my list now, I have about 18 people who have already raised their hand to come on and be a
What?
guest just because of those relationships I've built over the last year.
Wow. So you're already, I mean, you're already off to a great start. Like, and I think again, you bring up a good point with getting on LinkedIn and building a bit of a presence and reputation before starting a podcast. Because I think that gives you a little leverage to get going and gives you a level of credibility to then hopefully accelerate the growth. And so what what is the mission behind the podcast specifically?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The mission behind the podcast is education and awareness.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, there's a lot of talk about energy transition or integration, whatever you want to call it, right? I don't want to
Right.
upset people listening,
I get
but
it.
we don't know we don't know what that will look like in the future. But we do know that in order to meet this goal, we need to start diversifying our workforce. But unfortunately, there's a lot of misconceptions about DE&I and what it is. There's a lot of fear behind it. There's a lot of resistance behind it. And
Mhm.
so the podcast goal is to educate listeners so that way they understand why DE&I is a good thing and how it will benefit their business, especially from a revenue perspective.
Wow. Can you share any cases or examples of how it does? Because I know there is, and I'd love
Yeah.
to hear about at least one at least.
Absolutely. So I can share my personal case study. So while I was overseas, again, it's not energy sector, but same principles can be implemented in any industry, right?
Mhm.
So while we were at the facility, remember I mentioned the objective was to have a Western healthcare model while preserving the Arabic culture and Islamic religion.
Mhm.
And so originally we missed the mark, right? We didn't do a great job. We brought in male physicians that didn't speak Arabic. We created patient educational material that was in English, right? Some
Mhm.
of our clients only spoke Arabic. And
Yeah.
we didn't acknowledge the needs of the client. And these are the people that we serve. We also did not acknowledge the needs of employees. What tools and resources do employees need to serve their patients? I can tell you, being cursed out in Arabic is not fun, right? And so there was a high turnover rate because of that. But
Mm.
once we started, looking at what's important to our clients, what do our employees need to serve at a higher level, we were able to save the organization over 9.3 million in turnover costs. A
Nice.
year after we started implementing the processes, we had zero turnover because people started to enjoy coming to work. They had the support and the tools and resources to do their job effectively.
Yeah.
And we were able to reduce gestational diabetes within the community by 33%. And that's because we educated patients on the importance of keeping their prenatal appointments to get their blood sugar checks, right? And so once they understood, once they had the information presented in a way that they could read it and understand it, it made a significant difference. And
Hmm.
so you can take that approach, like our company has a proprietary framework. You can take that approach and apply it within the energy industry. And that way, whatever your outcomes, your goals are, you can set metrics so that way you can meet those goals.
Right. No, that's fascinating. And real quick, going back, do you remember what it sounded like to get cussed out in Arabic? Because I would love to hear it. I've been cussed out in a lot of languages, but not Arabic.
I don't remember the words, but I remember the gestures and the body. When someone's doing this, that's not a good sign.
I'm kidding, but I just had to ask. But no, so clearly the proof is in the pudding. And if you and again, if for anyone who likes reading into white papers or doing research, there's a ton of research, and even like HBR does a great job. They've published a lot of different things over the years about this. The data that supports DE&I and how that is so healthy for the business on so many different levels. But so, and then kind of going back to the podcast, because I do want to talk about the DE&I space within energy, but again, just touching a little bit more on the podcast itself. So you said you had all those folks. Are those ones that you've already recorded or that you have in the queue to record?
I have in the queue to record. So far we have recorded one episode with a guest, and that was actually at OTC. I don't know if you
Oh,
were there.
nice. I was going to try
Yeah.
and make it. I didn't make it downtown. I met up with people, but I didn't actually go to OTC.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did Baker Hughes.
Yeah.
The global human resource officer from Baker Hughes was our first guest, and we recorded live
Oh, cool.
at OTC. Yeah. What
Wow.
I'm doing is the first maybe 6 or 7 episodes will be solo,
Oh,
just to do some teaching, education. And then after that, I'll start bringing on more guests, but I already
cool.
have a queue of
Yeah.
people.
No, and
Yeah.
because what I was going to ask, and then I'll sort of reframe the question, because I was going to ask you, based off the folks that you've interviewed, like what are the biggest takeaways or lessons that you've learned? Being that it's been one, I'm sure there probably is one, but so then, okay, so then what can the listeners expect? So you said you did 5 or 6 solo, and then you're moving into the educational or the interview piece. Can you kind of walk us through what listeners can expect going from episode 1 to 5 or whatever it is?
Sure. So just the three, I recorded this the other day, the three most common mistakes in DE&I,
That's a good one.
inclusive leadership, DE&I and wellness. A lot of people don't understand how the two intersect.
Hmm.
Let's see, I am also doing one on employee resource groups, how you can develop allies just from employee resource groups.
Wow.
Another one is energy justice. The Department of Energy is doing a lot of work around energy justice. And so there are a lot of opportunities that any industry can take advantage of. There's grants. I don't know if you're aware, but President Biden is pumping out billions of dollars, right, in the energy space. So I
Hmm.
want to do something about that as well.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So just education and then bring on people to share their unique experiences. But you did
That's
mention
cool.
something that I wanted to tap into. You mentioned any trends that I've noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do executive roundtables, and I have identified um, one main trend that sticks out to me, and it's with the different sectors. So oil and gas is fairly new to adopting DE&I. There are some companies that are far more mature, like Baker Hughes and BP and SLB. But for
Yeah.
the most part, a lot of oil and gas companies are fairly new or in the infancy stage of implementing DE&I.
Right.
What I've noticed is utility companies, for whatever reason, utility seem to be more mature in their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. In fact, I have a guest that's coming on. He's going to talk about his company's transgender policy. So if you are in
Fascinating.
the midst of a sex change, the company actually has policies in place to support you through your transition. So I think that's pretty cool.
Wow. And I'll be honest, like that topic in itself can generate a lot of emotion. And so I applaud you for tackling that, or at least having someone on to talk about that. Uh, yeah, it's a very third rail type conversation, but the reality is there's that is real, and there's folks that are joining the workforce that are in that position, and whether you believe in it, you don't, you're upset at Bud Light, maybe you're not. Like this is it just is created such a storm of just a flurry of things. And again, it's like I'm not going to sit on either side of the fence with it, but I think the conversations need to be had because they're happening. And again, not to dive too deep into that, but it's an interesting conversation. Like I've never listened to a podcast where that's been a topic, and so to learn and to see whatever subject company is doing with that,
Yeah.
there may be something to take away from that to explain to our company one day. I mean, you never know. And so
Right. And
yeah,
that's the thing. You have to meet people where they are. There might be some organizations that say, whoa, well, hold on, we're not ready for that. Right.
yeah,
But 5, 10 years down the line, as the workforce starts to change and people become more comfortable with the topic, then they may be ready to listen. But my motto is meet people where they are, and I think that's
it's a
why
good point.
DEI can be a turnoff for some people because it feels like it's being forced on them.
Right.
Right.
So to kind of add to that, how's the momentum in the DE and I space, specifically in the oil and gas, or we can keep it high level and just say energy, because again, through observation on, and when I look at the sort of the resources that I gather information from, whether it be LinkedIn, different publications, be it Hard Energy, um, Bloomberg, a lot of these educational and news type publications, I felt like there was a major push, and there was a huge level of sort of marketing towards it. Has that died down, or is there still a lot of momentum and efforts and resources being allocated to create D&I programs?
Great question. There was a lot of momentum in 2020 because of, unfortunately, the George Floyd murder.
Correct.
Now it's tricky. Funds are being cut. DEI practitioners are being laid off. So it's challenging. It's challenging. You will always have, I will say this, you will always have companies that are committed despite what's happening economically,
Yeah.
because that is their mission, that is their passion. And that's where you can tell organizations who are not committed to DE&I is when they start to cut funds or lay off people that are in DE&I positions. And
Mm,
so what you have to do is just, block the noise and focus on the people who are committed to it.
yeah. No, it's a great answer. And it's a sad truth that like it takes real drastic situations to occur for a lot of people to all of a sudden jump in, put forth the effort to say, hey, look, like we're going to support and we're going to help. But then the minute it like, or as time goes on, the level of interest and effort kind of it kind of subsides. Then you questions like, were you in it for the right intent, or were you doing it because it was good PR? Like, and again, but like, it's tough too, is when you look at a business, the reason people are in business is to create value for shareholders. And if shareholders want to generate a profit, you do then have to look at certain positions and say, does this meet, does this support critical path? And, maybe not. And arguably in the long run, of course, having a strong DNI presence and system and program in place will, but in the short run, like, is it necessary? Well, maybe not. Again, it really depends on the company a lot of times and the leaders at the top, and are they willing to sacrifice profit to keep that momentum going? I think it varies widely. Like, kind of what's your, if someone were to come to you and say, hey, can we spend a lot of time and effort and resources creating one, but times are tough, our
Not
profits are
working.
dwindling.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what's your response to that? Do you continue to then try and push it, or do you say, oh, come back when things are good? Like, how do you
Oh,
type of handle that?
absolutely. I push it even more because 9 times out of 10, it's your strategy. You aren't getting the results that you want, and you aren't getting your ROI because the way it was implemented. And
Mm,
I won't get into DEI strategy on this episode, but
sure.
there's a certain way you have to, with any project, right? You can't put the cart before the horse. If you implement it the incorrect way, you will not see the results that you intended on. And then what happens when you don't get your investment back? People lose faith and confidence in something, and then they start to believe it doesn't work. And so that's why when it comes down to, budget cuts or restructuring, DNI professionals are the first ones to go, because that individual unfortunately has not demonstrated the value that it can bring to an organization.
Mm, that's fascinating. What are there, aside from the utility trend, are you noticing, like, because when we spoke last, there was still a lot of remote work uh stuff being had. I mean, do you, for people who are trying to bring people back, because I think that's also does play into DE&I, right? Like, if it's not necessarily like a gender, not even issue, but it's not so much about gender or how they look, whether piercings, no piercings, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of it is, well, you're going to exclude me because I want to work from home because I was able to set up my life during COVID. I have kids. Like, has that now, like, are you seeing that be a focal point and something that you're tackling for people who want to work from home, but their company policies now you have to come back to the office? Like, can you speak any on that?
Yeah, so I don't know if you pay attention to the federal space, but
Not
President
much.
Biden, yeah, issued, I don't know, I don't think it's an executive order, but it was requested that all federal employees return back to the office.
Okay.
And that poses challenges because you have to factor in childcare. If you have an elderly parent that lives with you, who's going to care for them, right?
Hmm.
And so, what we try to do, we try to get companies to look at the data. Can this employee do their job effectively at home? Or is there a portion of their role that requires them to be in the office? So, we look at the rationale and the reasoning behind bringing people back. Um, Another thing we review is transition policies or transition programs. So helping
Oh.
employees transition back to the workplace. So let's help them find childcare if that's an issue. Let's help them find a home nursing attendant that can come and support their parents.
Mm.
What are people comfortable with? I know I was working with one company and we created bands, right? Because there are still people that are afraid to be around crowds. So it's a
Oh,
red
wow.
band. Yeah, a red band. Don't touch me. I don't want to shake your hand. Don't hug me. Yellow means, 6 feet. And then green means that, I'm okay with, shaking hands and touching you. So you
Wow.
have to, yeah, you have to accommodate people because we've been remote for
Hmm.
almost 3 years now. In fact, it has been 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's a huge transition that could be quite traumatic for some people. So you want to support employees. If they do have to come back to the office, you want to support them. Otherwise, they might leave and find a remote position, which we see
Right.
happen occasionally as well.
Yeah, no, that the band thing's interesting, and I can just hear it in my head, people debating that because then it's like you're putting people in buckets, which is not inclusive. You know what I mean? Again, I could just you hear
Well,
it all.
this is self-selection. So you're not forced to pick a band,
Okay, I got you.
yeah, but let's say, you know what, I'm not comfortable being in a room full of people.
Okay,
I want to let people know that this is uncomfortable for me. Just please respect my boundaries.
right. No,
Yeah, so
and
you
that
don't
makes
have to wear a
sense.
band. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, I'll like 3 on one and 2 on the other and just confuse everybody. I'm just kidding. But well, there was another one too. So, and I'm sure we probably touched on this last time because COVID was even more relevant. And not that to say it's not relevant today, but data would suggest that not as many people are getting infected, whatever. But
Right.
there are still people who are, I would imagine there's a group of people who are still concerned and who are maybe more at risk. And this might be more of an HR question, but if companies are saying, hey, we'd like for people to come back to work, and Johnny's like, well, I really am, I feel like I'm at risk. Obviously they would have to consult with their HR department to get that figured out. But I mean, from an inclusivity standpoint, like, do you have any thoughts around or how companies could approach it, not necessarily from an HR perspective, but to like make sure that person still feels inclusive or they're still included within the organization, even though they may feel at risk? And again, not an HR sort of lens, but more a DE&I
Mm.
lens.
Yeah, I would probably recommend to find out where the where what the threat is, what they perceive the threat to be. So are you afraid of coming back to the office because of exposure? Is
Mm,
it that you don't like being around people? Is it
yeah,
impacting your mental health? Because remember now, there is a thing called reasonable accommodation, right?
right.
So if this is impacting your mental well-being, like you have a diagnosis of anxiety about coming back to the office, now that's a reasonable accommodation please comes into play. You can get a doctor's note from your doctor, but you have to have a diagnosis of anxiety or some type of mental health issue because of this.
Mm,
Once you get that doctor's order, you submit it to HR, then they can grant you reasonable accommodation. And then that way
ah,
you continue to work remote. But there's a process behind that. Listeners, don't take this as gospel. Follow up with HR. I
right.
don't
Yeah.
want everyone saying, well, Kym told me to do this. No, you
Yeah.
have
Kym
to
said I get to
follow.
stay at home. I'm staying at
Right.
home.
No, that's not what I'm saying. It is a process. But I do know of people that genuinely had anxiety about the thought of going back to the workplace. For example, people
Yeah.
that live in New York City, that was the epicenter at the beginning of the pandemic. So
Right.
just the thought of riding on the subway, people coughing and sneezing and
Mm.
I'm getting anxious just thinking about it. But yeah, you have to assess your situation. And if you believe you may qualify for that, then yeah, have a conversation with HR to see what they might require.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's what I said. It's probably more of an HR question, but again, it also just ties together. I'm curious, you mentioned earlier about the executive roundtables, I believe you called it.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on like how people get involved or and how, what that kind of looks like and sort of some of the takeaways that you've gotten from some of these?
Executive roundtables are a great conversation starter. So the way it works is very small and intimate. I only invite maybe 4 to 5 executives from any industry, oil and gas, utilities, electric vehicle, whatever, right? And we come together And the framework is we go through a DE&I maturity model. And what this model does is it helps organizations identify where they are in their DE&I journey and then the next steps that they need to take to get to the next level.
Hmm.
But what makes it so unique is that everyone goes around and around robin fashion and they share where they are and they actually share some of the barriers that are holding them back from reaching the next level. And
Cool.
so we're able to gain insight from different leaders and leaders can share, what's working for them or what didn't work. So everyone walks away with value.
That's so cool. Has there been any conversations that were A, uncomfortable, or B, you were like, wow, I never, like, I've been in this industry for X amount of years and I never thought this was a thing? Like, does anything kind of was anything surprising to you hearing these executives discuss their challenges or solutions?
Honestly, Justin, I think I've seen it all. I mean, I'm sure there are situations I have not encountered, but up until
Yeah,
now, no, nothing has been shocking.
I got you. No, hey, it is,
Yeah.
that's the answer is the answer. I was just curious. Um, and again, I think you've probably had some very interesting conversations over the years, and so I was curious on that. But no, again, Kym, it's so cool to be able to catch up with you. I think, again, the next time we catch up, we'll likely be on a podcast again, which is sad to say it, but it creates a great opportunity to catch up, hear what you're doing. Lastly, on tell everyone about your company, what it is, and how you sort of the mechanics behind, if like, who's your avatar or who's someone ideal that if they're listening, it's like, you know what, that's me. I really should reach out to Kym and we should chat business. Like, what does that look like?
Sure. So if you are an energy leader, that could be a chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer or a chief human resource officer, chief well-being. I don't know if that exists in this industry, but that is a title I've seen.
Sure.
Reach out to me if you are thinking about starting your DEI journey, or you currently have a strategy in place, but you aren't sure if the methodology is going to get you the outcomes you're seeking. Please reach out to me, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active, and yeah, would love
Perfect.
to chat with you.
No, that's perfect. And for those, I mean, you mentioned chief this and chief that. What if a company's not that big? Because our company, we got a CEO and a CFO and a COO. You know what I mean? But like, what like an HR manager obviously would be someone else. Like, if you were to, on a smaller scale, say a company doesn't have different levels of executives, would HR manager or someone that's in HR ultimately could reach out to, or really anybody? But
Yes, yes,
okay.
yes. Anyone you can reach out to me, and you can route me to the proper person to speak to. So yes.
Of course. Perfect. And what I'll do is I'll put your website link and all your links in the show notes, also to the podcast, because once this releases, you'll have had episodes out there for people to tune in and check it out. Lastly, and I don't remember what personal question I asked on the last one. I think I asked you maybe what your ideal Friday night was. Does that ring a bell? If not, okay. Well, let me do this. I'm gonna ask something different. What's something about yourself that not many people know about? I mean, you grind all day, you're working hard, but you said you like to do some self-care. So what does your Kym's self-care routine look like? And
Sleep.
keep it, doesn't have to be explicit. Keep it, PC here. Come on.
I know. I'll keep it rated G. No, sleep, sleep.
Okay.
So
Okay.
many
That's
people
huge.
don't know I am an introvert, right? So introverts get burned out very, very fast. And
Okay.
so I have to sleep in order to, rejuvenate and just clear my head and my thoughts. So that way
Mhm.
I have the energy to continue on the next day. So, yeah, two things: I'm an introvert and I
Okay.
love to sleep.
Okay. So when you say sleep, sleep's a fascinating conversation. I track my sleep and I'm like a data nerd
Oh,
when it comes
really?
to biometrics. And like, for me, even so, the quality of sleep matters. There's a difference
Yes.
between getting 6 hours of quality sleep versus 9 hours of crappy sleep because you've watched TV right before bed, you ate a bunch of potato chips, and you just can't calm down. Next thing you know, you're lying in bed with your eyes open for X amount of time. But how do you prepare for a good night's sleep? Because I think that's something that not many people talk about. Because they always talk about morning routine, but what does your before bed routine look like?
So probably 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, no caffeine. So I don't drink coffee or sodas. I try to avoid sugar as well because what I've noticed is that it spikes my insulin.
Mm.
And in the middle of the night, my blood sugar drops and I wake up sweating.
Ah,
So that interferes with my sleep. Yeah. So caffeine, sugar, any refined carbohydrates, I try to avoid. And then I
cool.
take
Interesting.
and I try to keep my room cool, like around 70 degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do you take melatonin?
I have no problems falling asleep,
It's staying
but
asleep.
yes, yes. And I find that melatonin helps me stay asleep during the night.
Okay. No, it's
Yeah.
interesting. And again, like aside from oil and gas and energy and that, which is like most of my life, like my passion is health, fitness,
Oh,
and
really?
more from like a human performance perspective, not like
Okay.
bodybuilding stuff. But I've read and done research on a lot of this stuff. And so if you're like, why are you asking me these questions? Because I'm genuinely like passionate about it.
Okay.
How much melatonin do you take before bed? Do you know?
Oh, I take a lot. I take 20 milligrams.
20 milligrams? Kim, what? You could have a hurricane come over your house and you probably wouldn't even notice. Oh my goodness.
Like, no wonder you don't wake up. You're like
What?
overdosing on melatonin. Yeah, I take 20 milligrams. Yeah.
But you know what? Hey, it's very individualized. I know people who take half a milligram and it's enough. I've
Really?
Yeah, I can take half a milligram in it. So when I was in school, in grad school, I would do schoolwork up until like 10:30 or 11. And because of just like how my mind was racing and just again, there's a level of stress when you're reading and your complex problems and your, critical thinking stuff. It was hard for me to calm down. And so I would use CBD and melatonin to like calm my nerves. I would try and read a little bit that had nothing to do with school. Um, and yeah, I found that if I took half to a milligram of melatonin, it was
Wow.
enough to get me to calm down in addition to the CBD. So anyway, but it's all people, someone people like a half a milligram to some would be nothing,
Wow.
right? So anyway, but I was just curious. And then so you were talking about your insulin levels dropping or your blood sugar dropping, to which then you wake up. Do you track your glucose real time or how do you know
I
that?
do. So
Oh,
remember I was
cool.
on my weight loss journey to lose 15 pounds. So what I
Yeah, yeah.
did was I went and had my A1C check. Do you know what that
Yep.
is? You
I've had
familiar?
that check too. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, so not pre-diabetic because I was curious. I thought
Yeah.
maybe I was pre-diabetic or something, but no, I'm not pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
Um, I just contributed to eating sugar late at night.
Mm, okay.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, regardless, if you eat a bunch of refined carbohydrates or anything that's going to spike your blood sugar, which if you're an anomaly person out there, sometimes people can eat something that doesn't spike their blood sugar. For the most part, sugar and any like carbohydrate, whether it be potato chips or snacks or anything that's boxed for the most part, unless you're being like boxed banana, but even then that would spike your blood sugar. Anyway, yeah, that would typically have it would spike, it would drop, and then that would typically wreck your circadian rhythm, which is helps you sleep. But anyway, we're totally going off on a tangent. So Kim's routine is drown herself in melatonin and good night, which is cool. Hey, if it works, it works. Do you track your sleep?
So what?
Do you track your sleep?
No, I probably should. I
Okay.
used to have an app that actually could tell when I would turn over or,
Oh yeah.
rotate. Yeah, but I don't
Okay.
track it now.
Okay. No worries. If you do, check out Whoop or the Aura Ring. They're
Okay.
good for tracking sleep. But this is definitely not a sleep podcast, folks. You've probably cut this off. You haven't by now. You're interested in this
I
stuff
know
too,
no
just
one's
like Kim and
listening
I.
anyway.
I know. So, but anyway, in the interest of time, and if anyone is still listening, please connect with Kim. Scroll down. I've got the links in the show notes. If you could take a minute to review it, share the podcast with at least one person. If all you do today is share this episode with one person, hopefully someone who could then reach out to Kim and they can connect, maybe chop it up about business. That would be so much appreciated. Kim, any closing last words, any thoughts, any message you'd like to relay to the podcast world?
No, just thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure. And, if we are going to do this energy integration, transition, whatever that looks like, we just work together. There's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So
Ooh,
I just, yeah.
I've seen that, but I didn't know it was an African proverb. That's so cool.
Yes.
I love
Yeah.
that. It's so true. I love that. Cool. Well, with that being said, everyone, thanks again for listening. And always remember that everyone deserves access to energy, and we is greater than me. Thanks, everybody.